In this episode of Collect or Reject,
We're going to talk about body styles. We need to know how much spoilers do you want to do on this book?
It's tough because there's some interesting twists in here.
And body type's going to bring us into one of those conversations.
Whether you a hero or a villain, expedition leads to crazy feelings. Every page I turn, you know I gotta feel it. New stories everywhere, busting out the comic strip. Story so good, it got me on a power trip. Crazy battles got my mind in a total race. Page 1, the original story takes place. So gear up for the new storyline. Writing so good it sends chills down your spine. Collect or reject, 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 collect or reject.
Greetings, true believers. Welcome to Collect or Reject, a show about comics, or more specifically, lesser-known comics. My name is Mark Withers, and I'm honored and privileged to be your host today. Here's how it works. Each week, a guest and I will read 5 issues of a pre-selected title, and based on those 5 issues, we'll try and determine whether or not that comic should be added to your pull list. Today's comic is Scout's Honor by David Pepose and Luca Casalanguida. Joining me to talk about it is the author of the 3-book series National City Stories, as well as an avid comic book reader in his own right. And before you ask, no, we're not related. Ladies and gentlemen, John M. Withers IV. John, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's just get into this right off the bat because, when I first encountered you on Facebook, your name kind of struck me because my dad's name, may he rest in peace, his name was also John Withers. So when I saw your name, I was like, whoa. But you were telling me,
very common name, yeah.
Yeah. You were saying it was a really common name, especially like where you're from. Like you're from Iron Station, right? In North Carolina?
Charlotte, North Carolina. Mm-hmm.
Right. And my dad is from Davidson. So like that is like super close. And we kind of mentioned that off mic. But like you said, yeah, like super common name, but still like seeing
and
your
a small
name.
World too. That's absolutely.
Yep. That is crazy. So getting into the comic itself, before we even do any of that, I kind of wanted the audience to get a little bit of a feel for who you are and what you do. So if you could,
it's my first time on the show. Yeah.
Right on. So if you could just give us a little bit of background about who you are and how you got into comics specifically.
I'm the standard kid that in the late 80s, early 90s was looking at spinner racks, that back when they were still in grocery stores, picking up one here, one there. My father had been really into comics as a child and not being able to hold on to any because it's the family trauma stories, right? He bought them, read them, and then hid them or got rid of them so his parents wouldn't find out. So he gave me some kind of growing up. But in the late 80s, early 90s, I was in that middle school age. I was earning some money. I had a job already, and I was putting money into comics. I was there for like the Marvel 2099 run was my big moment. Like it felt like a brand new universe in Marvel that we could jump into with new characters that were just Spider-Man in the future. But it felt new and fresh, and I was really into it. So I was there at the birth of the Image Revolution, and we were passing them all around in the middle school lunchroom, trading and reading things on school buses. I went from there. In college, I wound up picking up the issues from the early 90s that I couldn't buy because I had limited budget and limited job. But yeah, I'm that generation of reader. Yep, absolutely. But more importantly, Mark, were you a Boy Scout?
Actually, it's funny that you ask because I was actually a Cub Scout even. Mm-hmm. I did the entire run. I didn't quite make it to Eagle Scout, but I was a Cub Scout. Nice. I went through Webelos and then became a Boy Scout. Right. Was a tenderfoot, did all those things. And then somewhere along the way, as I got older and got more involved in high school, I kind of fell off of scouting. I never quite made it to Eagle Scout. How about yourself?
I was a Cub Scout and Webelos, and I made it to tenderfoot. The boys that I came up with were moving toward the Eagle Scouts. I just stalled out at tenderfoot. I wanted the education, I wanted the fun and the experiences. I didn't care about the advancement tests. So I could have went a little further than Eagle Scout, but by high school, I got into high school marching bands and other kind of pieces. And so I never finished up, but I had a really good scouting experience. And now I'm kind of privileged because my daughter is a Cub Scout. She's a Webelo, moving through to her era of life this year and is looking toward being a Scout or a Boy Scout next year if it all works out. There's a little bit going on with scouting right now. We've not been keeping up. It's kind of a little uncertain, but hopefully she'll be a Scout next year. I'm really liking that experience for her too. So Yeah, I think the comic book pedigree is important here, but I also think our scouting plays a big role in how we're going to read this book today. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump into it because it's a super interesting title to me and the premise is fantastic. But before that, I kind of wanted you to also tell us a little bit about National City Stories and
Okay.
some of
Oh,
the
I'd love
other
to.
titles that you've written.
I will always plug myself. So I've been a writer forever. In high school, I was writing, bad high school prose like we do. I had a buddy that was drawing, and he was trying to, do a comic book with me, and it just never went anywhere. I put writing aside for the college courses and the college homework for a while. When I flunked out or dropped out of the PhD program, it was just, finances and life. Intelligence was there, life was not. I threw myself completely into writing fiction because I wanted to prove that I could write something a dissertation length. And so I wrote what is now going to be a 6-book series, not National City Stories, but the original one, The Goblin's Gift, and then The Castle's Imagination, as interactive fiction. And it's linked cycle interactive fiction. So it's like the Choose Your Own Adventure books or the Pick a Pass you might have bumped into as a kid, but the choices matter from one book to the next inside of a series. I went to comic book conventions and were selling that pretty well pre-pandemic, but a lot of people were looking at the few fantasy books I had, asking, where's the horror, where's the science fiction, where's everything else? And so during the pandemic, I really diversified: romance, horror, all of it's coming. There's a wide variety of things that I've written, but all of it is coming. I'm gonna write in all the genres. National City, I sent over to you particularly because it's got a manga chapter in each zine. It's like a little magazine length, small digest with a short story that's interactive. The short story is set on a luchador island. It's like an island ran by luchador wrestlers. And
Right.
then the backup story there in every issue is a manga about a Detroit police officer with a sword that's also an aardvark. And eventually, if I can go far enough, those two stories collide and you wind up having a aardvark wrestling some luchadors and having a good old time. So yeah, I've got a little bit of experience in the writing side of things. I can't draw to save my life, but I've written a few things, including some manga, some comics.
Awesome. And what I've read so far is great, man. So
Thank you. It's
with
unique at least. It's
yeah,
kind of an odd
absolutely.
flavor. I didn't want to write the same fantasy story every time. And so I've done some unique pieces in the interactive space with, frame tells and different ways to form the mechanics. Just trying to find some new ways to tell old stories, as we all
Absolutely.
always are.
So without further ado, let's just jump right into the story here. Scout's Honor. I'll just say right off the bat that I'm completely enamored with the premise of this thing.
I
I'm
want to
terrible.
like it. I'm just not sure I do. So I'm glad one of us does.
Well, here's the thing. So I liken this to there's an old Kevin Costner film that came out a while back called The Postman, which most
Right.
people don't like, but I actually like that film. I like at least the premise, and this
Yep.
kind of reminds me of that. Now, I've said many times on this show and other episodes that I'm not a great explainer of synopses. So I tend to let other resources do that for me. And in this case, I took a description from Comic Book Resources. So I'm going to read
Okay.
that for the purposes of this episode. Years after a nuclear apocalypse, a new society has risen from the ashes, and their Bible is an old Ranger Scout manual. A young Ranger Scout named Kit has endured the harsh survivalist upbringing needed to conquer the irradiated Colorado Badlands. But after discovering a terrible secret once lost to history, Kit must risk everything on a dangerous quest to uncover the truth behind the Ranger Scouts doctrine. Now, I think that's a pretty apt description of kind of what's going on here.
I would want to
I,
throw in that the radiation kept people off the surface of the planet for 26 years. In the
yeah,
very first pages, they're kind of re-emerging to try to rebuild society, and they've been gone for 9,562 days, which is roughly 25, 26 years.
right.
And then Kit, our main protagonist, our main person here, is what, 16 years old, 15?
Yes.
So the Ranger Scouts that we see trying to become Ranger Scouts kind of in that formative moment have never lived above ground until they're thrown into the wasteland. They don't know any society except for whatever indoctrination society has given them in the underground, and then the last few years trying to like re-emerge in that very Kevin Costner Patriot Waterworld kind of way, right? These aren't characters like we see in Mad Max that remember the society before the fall. We're almost completely looking at characters that only know society as it is in their moment. But other than that, that's a pretty good description, sure.
This is what I got from it. So we're talking about a group of people that, like you said, emerged 26 years after an apocalyptic event. But then the Ranger Scouts that we see kind of going through the trials, like Kit and Dez and some of the other scouts, they're probably 15, 16 years old. So that's 15, 16 years after these people emerge. So we're talking maybe 40 years, an entire generation of people who have never known society as we know it. Their only point of reference towards the old world is this scouting manual, which they basically treat as a Bible, and it's interesting to see, having been a scout in my era in the 1980s, seeing them use the tenets of scouting as a complete way of life, where they're living and dying by these edicts that to us were like, I don't want to say that they're very small deals, but it's like, if you didn't do your good deed for the day, it wasn't like a big deal, but to them, it's a sin if you don't.
You remember the Boys Life magazines?
I do remember those.
And the Boys Life magazines, the scouts they featured always reminded me of the scouts that they're writing about in this comic, right? It was always like the Uber scout, like the perfect scout that did their 3 good deeds a day, lived by the handbook, could be survivalist, very Bears Grylls kind of 8-year-olds were always being featured in that magazine. And so that's kind of my touching point for this. And I'm glad we were both scouts and we kind of grew up with some understanding of this vocabulary they keep throwing around, because those scout laws that they're talking about are absolutely taken from scouting. There's just no way around it. That's the Boy Scouts of America are the foundational piece to understanding Ranger Scouts. So
right. And that was something that I really enjoyed about the comic. I also like the little side references, right? For example, there's a drone that Kit's father sort of reprograms, and then he names that drone Weeblo. So for people at home who are not familiar with scouting at all, the Weeblos were, and probably still are, sort of like the middle point between a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. Like you kind of go through that section as like a preteen.
Kind of late elementary school, early middle school is kind of that age gap there.
Exactly. So it was interesting to have that name in there as a reference. Also, there's a giant spider that Kit names Tenderfoot, and a Tenderfoot is like, that's your first that's sort of your entry point as a Boy Scout. You start out as a Tenderfoot,
and then the name of the rank, right?
Exactly. That's what I was kind of getting at. Thank you for that. I couldn't remember what I was trying to say, but yes, that is your first rank as a Boy Scout. So it was nice to have.
And it comes at a moment when Kit's trying to prove something about themselves on their own too, which I think is kind of nice and makes that Tenderfoot reference really solid. I loved that one. The Weeblo name seemed like set dressing to me. It was kind of just slapped on to this drone, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, this kind of R2D2 flying drone character. Why Weeblo for that one? Out of all the words in scouting, why not Baloo or some other scout word? Why Weeblo there? But Tenderfoot absolutely thematically worked for me with the spider,
right.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
and riding giant spiders is always awesome.
Yeah. So, it looks like we may have like a difference of opinion in terms of story and plot, but let's talk about the art a little bit. Now, Luca Casalanguida did the artwork here.
Luca did all the line art, it looks like, and then Matt did the colors. I'll shout both names out there.
What were your thoughts overall on the
it's a nice style. I've seen this style in a lot of indie press kind of books before. This is the first time I read an Aftershock book, Aftershock being the publisher, that I knew was an Aftershock book. I think I was looking through their list and I've seen 1 or 2 of their titles and flipped through them and read the first 2 issues here or there. This is the first time I've read 5 issues from Aftershock. It's one of the newer presses, smaller than Boom Studios or some of the names audience may know for the last 10 years. So nice artwork, good looking production values. Yeah, no complaints there.
My only complaint here is that there was sort of a bit of inconsistency in the way the characters were drawn from issue to issue. That may have been intentional, because
I think that's the style, because a lot of the characters don't have faces at all. And there's a lot of times even our main characters don't have faces. While we're talking, I've got the last issue, like the last pages of the last issue up, because I've got a point I want to make sure I don't forget on that last page. And it looks completely natural, and the people in the far distance in that shot have no faces, just kind of outlines. But even our main characters have no faces. They're just sort of a chin and hair.
Right.
It's just a weird kind of thing if you've been reading Marvel and DC books where all the face details are always there. But overall, there's enough costuming, enough hair that you can tell who's who.
Right. But even in the body styling, like, right. So like
How
from
many
issue to
spoilers do we want to give
issue,
this book?
I'm
If
sorry.
we're going to talk about body styles, we need to know how much spoilers do you want to do on this book?
It's tough because
Right.
there's some interesting twists in here.
And body type's
Um,
going to bring us into one of those conversations.
yeah, and I see where you're going with that. Maybe we steer clear. Maybe we steer clear of it. From here, we should probably take a minute, talk about the dollar value of this book. Now, of course, it's only about 18 months old, came out in January of 2021. The cover price is about $3.99. And if you look today, the average cost really hasn't moved very much,
Oh,
probably about
probably not.
$4.99 with like a 1A like non-variant. I've seen them going for about $8, $9. Not too much of a value hike, but of course, there really hasn't been a whole lot of time. So the question
Right.
that I would ask is, does this sway your verdict one way or the other as far as whether or not this is a collectible?
Does Aftershock do trades?
I think that they probably have just started doing trades.
It's a fairly new company, I think. It's kind
Right,
of hit my horizon recently. I think they're a fairly new company. I could be wrong. Um,
right.
if they're getting into the trade game, I think I'd pick it up as a trade. If I could
Mm-hmm.
grab this thing for $15 complete, read the entire story, which was clearly the way it was meant to be read, I would have been frustrated with this month by month, waiting on the next issue. The reading experience to me works better in a chunk than it
Gotcha.
did if I'd read it, waited a month or 2 months, hoping the next issue would come out. And especially for small publishers, I'm often willing to jump on a trade because I don't get the entire story. You have one or two good issues, then the publisher goes under. I never get to read the rest of that story. It really annoys me.
Yeah.
I would definitely jump on this and trade. I bet it didn't sell that well. I don't know what selling well even means in the modern moment or the comic book
Right.
shop economy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it probably didn't sell that well because you've got a lot of pieces working against it. A newer author that's worked in various medias, but not as many comics as true crime novels. You've got an artist, Luca Castellago. They do. I'm butchering that last name. That has
I do
worked
too, all
in
the
every
time.
studio, but never been a household name. He's done
Mm-hmm.
DC and Boom and IDW and Marvel. He's got a pretty nice resume, but he's not a name people are going to buy the book for, unless there's
Mm-hmm.
some Luca heads out there that just spam us in the comments. The entire team looks solid, but it's not one that's going to just make you pick this book up. So the cover images are selling it to you. Then you've got a store trying to decide, can they move this unit? And I'm betting they didn't order a lot of them.
Right.
A couple just kind of test the waters on Aftershock, test the waters on this title and this team. But it's really hard to be a store and jump in on a new publisher and then convince your clients they're going to be here in a year. So
Right.
it gets easier as you go. But yeah, I think I'd definitely jump a trade to this. If I could find 115 or less, I'd grab that. Trying to pick up individual issues for more than $15, no, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. Now, of course, this came out sort of in the midst of the pandemic,
And
and
were
I'm
stores open
sure
or not open? Could you browse
exactly.
the racks? It'd be a hard
It,
time to launch this title. So,
exactly. And then, of
right,
course, also in the middle of the diamond
right.
controversy, with all of that happening, I'm sure that that worked against it. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
know that this comic, when it was sort of being ramped up, it actually got really, really good reviews, which
Yeah,
is how it got on my radar. And it was one of
good.
those things that at the time I was like, oh, I should kind of take a look at this. But I was collecting so many titles at the time that I kind of just forgot about it. And I
Right.
never picked it up. And I'm sure that that is probably the case for a lot of would be readers. I have a tendency to think that there's probably not going to be a big reason for people to revisit this unless they hear about it again, unless there's
Right.
like a resurgence in interest. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if this ever gets optioned for an animated series
Oh, they're
or a
definitely trying to be
show or
optioned.
something like that. You know what I mean?
Right now, this team is working to become Netflix's next TV show. I can guarantee it. I would imagine it's going to pop up on Amazon before we get a volume two. It looks like this team's doing a lot of things, and it really feels like a Mark Millar kind of throw a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ideas out there and see what you can get on Netflix. Kind
Yep.
of
Yep.
kind of move.
Yeah.
But the team may have a great hit with their next piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then that might make people come back and rediscover the trade or these issues and give it that value. But it's really going to take this team or some member of this team having a really solid next outing that catches fire to send people looking for this one, unless we'll start talking about it. So I'm really glad it was on your list of things we could talk about. for this episode. I'm glad we picked this one.
With that, I think that we could probably just jump right into our verdict here. So what say you on this one? Collect or reject?
I'm glad I read it. If it's not hanging around the house, that's fine too. This is one that I would love to maybe show to one or two friends or kind of pass around a friend group. But if someone just kept it and it never came back, I'm fine with that. It doesn't need to be in my long box forever.
Got you. I think this is probably going to be a reject from me also.
You're the one that liked it.
I liked it, but here's the thing. I enjoyed this, but I don't know that I would, I usually say pull list as far as whether or not I'm going to collect. Right. But this is only 5 issues. It doesn't look like it's going to go any further than that. So
even we're talking the little afterward note from the author at the end of the 5th issue really sounds like, thanks for reading. We'll never see each other again.
Basically, yeah. And it really doesn't leave the door open for any new stories either. At the very end, it seems like it's just completely resolved. Like there's nowhere for it to really go.
Everything very neatly in the 5th issue and the last few pages, kind of that classic resolution. I can see new stories adding to that world. Kit and Desi and the surviving people. I can see them having new stories, but I don't know how they're different than Walking Dead.
Exactly.
It's just post-apocalyptic life at that point, where it's now a farm novel or something. I'm sure there's a neighboring town that we haven't met yet that has a different philosophy, and there's conflict and war and all kinds of possibilities out there. I doubt they'll ever do it unless Netflix wants them to.
Right. I just don't see this really going anywhere as much as I like the story. And I really like the premise of it. Like I said, I'm kind of on your thing of just grabbing this as a trade. If that, there's a great number of comics that can be read online, but still you would collect them. I don't think this is one of those. I think that this is one where you could just read this on a Kindle or a Comixology or something like that, and you would get what you wanted out of it, out of one reading. So for me, that's going to be a reject.
Absolutely. I don't really collect for the investment part of it because I grew up in the 90s comic scene where everything was going to be worth $1,000 one day and none of it was. Right. It's all in dollar bins and quarter bins. So I don't really care that it's never going to be valuable. But if you're at a friend's house and they have this on their coffee table, you should grab it and stick it in your pocket and read it. Maybe take it back when you're done. Maybe not. They probably won't care. But I think it is a nice, enjoyable read. Off mic a little bit ago, we were talking about how it's just not a cape book. It's not a superhero book.
Right.
So I think that if you have friends and family around you that might enjoy comics but are done with superhero movies and superheroes and pop media, that's probably where the value in this lies, is grab this and give that to a reader that you want to get into comics but are done with superheroes. Let's make a good gift.
Absolutely. And we're going to go ahead and leave it there. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, John M. Withers IV, for being here today. Before you go, please tell our audience where they can find you.
John M. Withers IV comes up on Amazon and links to a lot of great interactive fiction books. I'm also around on Twitter and Facebook under that same name, John M. Withers IV, for that author page. So I can be found if people want to come looking for me. I'm out there on the socials.
And of course, I want to thank all of you for listening. If you like what you heard here today, please rate and review this episode. Until next time, this is Mark Withers. Catch you on the next page.
Collect or Reject is a production of Press Play Media in association with Von Keith Sounds. This episode was produced and edited by Mark Withers. Music by Keith Sewell. Scout's Honor was created by David Pipos and Luca Casalanguida for Aftershock Comics. For more information on this and other episodes, visit us at collectorreject.com.